Behind the dust-choked trails, the echo of revolvers, and the unforgettable standoffs of classic Western cinema lies a story even more thrilling than the movie itself. When most people watch The Magnificent Seven, the 1960 film that reshaped the Western genre, they only see the finished product. Bold heroes, desperate villagers, and the ruthless outlaw gang that terrorizes them. But the truth is, the making of this legendary film was a battle all on its own. The cameras may have been rolling in Mexico, but behind the scenes, chaos. Feuds exploded. Props were stolen, weddings happened right on set, and at one point, the actors were literally receiving their dialogue just hours before the cameras started rolling. If you love discovering hidden stories from classic shows, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss the amazing surprises we've got lined up. Not just today, but in every episode we release. Here are 15 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up.
Number 1.
In 1960, Steve McQueen wasn't yet the Hollywood icon we remember. He was a rising star on television, leading the hit show Wanted, Dead, or Alive. But TV wasn't enough for him. McQueen wanted the silver screen, and The Magnificent Seven was his golden ticket. There was just one problem. His studio boss, Dick Powell, absolutely refused to let him out of his TV contract. So, what did McQueen do? He staged an escape worthy of one of his own movie characters. While in Boston, he deliberately slammed his car, a rented Cadillac, into the side of a bank building. The crash wasn't random. It was carefully planned. Enough damage to look serious, but not enough to hurt him. Then he strapped on a neck brace, claimed severe whiplash, and demanded medical leave. While his studio believed he was recovering, McQueen was actually on his way to Mexico to film The Magnificent Seven. His gamble paid off. That role catapulted him from TV cowboy to full-fledged movie star. Years later, his wife Neela Adams admitted the whole thing was staged. McQueen didn't just land a role. He literally crashed his way into Hollywood history.
Number 2.
While most actors keep their private lives separate from work, Yul Brynner, the bald-headed commanding star of the Ten Commandments, did the opposite. During filming in Cuernavaca, Mexico, Brynner decided to marry his second wife, Doris Kleiner, a stunning Chilean model. But instead of flying back to Hollywood for a glamorous ceremony, he tied the knot right on set. And here's where it gets cinematic. The wedding decor wasn't rented, it was recycled. The film crew had already built colorful fiesta decorations for a party scene in the movie. Vibrant flowers, banners, and streamers. Instead of letting them sit idle, Brynner used them for his real wedding celebration. His co-stars, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, all played double duty that day. Not just as fellow actors, but as wedding guests. Imagine pausing between gunfights and shootouts to toast the bride and groom. The marriage lasted until 1967, and they even had a daughter together, Victoria Brynner. Her godmother? None other than Audrey Hepburn. Only in Hollywood do movie sets transform into wedding chapels.
Number 3.
Imagine showing up to work and being handed today's script this morning, and then being expected to perform it by lunch. That was daily life on the set of The Magnificent Seven. The screenplay was originally adapted from Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece, Seven Samurai, but constant rewrites turned production into a whirlwind. Writer Walter Newman started the adaptation, but once filming began in Mexico, he wasn't available to make changes. Enter William Roberts, who became the emergency script doctor. Every night, Roberts and the director would scramble to rework scenes. By morning, actors like Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson were handed freshly typed pages. No rehearsal, no prep time, just here's your dialogue, now let's shoot. This frantic system gave the film a raw, unpolished energy. Some lines feel improvised, some scenes flow unpredictably, but that spontaneity added grit. The irony? When award season came, only Roberts got official credit, while Newman, frustrated, demanded his name be removed. So the next time you rewatch The Magnificent Seven, know this: many of those iconic lines were written just hours before the cameras rolled.
Number 4.
In the movie, not all 7 heroes make it to the end. But how did director John Sturges decide who would live and who would die? Not by story, Not by emotion, not even by drama. Instead, he used casting order. Whoever signed their contract first, their character died first. Whoever came on last, they survived the longest. It was an unusual, almost poetic decision. The actors who'd been attached to the project the longest were the first to fall, while the late additions fought to the end. It created a strange meta-narrative. The film's fictional deaths mirrored the real-world timeline of how the cast was assembled. On set, it may have looked like a practical shortcut for Sturgis, but on screen, it gave the finale an eerie rhythm, as if fate itself had been tied to the business of Hollywood contracts.
Number 5.
Villain Eli Wallach, who played the cunning bandit leader Calvera, wasn't just riding any old saddle. His ornate, silver-trimmed gear once belonged to Marlon Brando. Brando had used it in his own western One-Eyed Jacks just before the Magnificent Seven began filming. Instead of storing it away, the studio recycled the saddle, and Wallach loved it. He believed his character would flaunt wealth, shiny trinkets, expensive gear, as proof of years of raiding and stealing. So in a twist of Hollywood hands-me-downs, Wallach's villain was literally sitting on another legend's saddle. Even more fascinating, both films, though different in tone, pushed westerns into new territory. Brando's One-Eyed Jacks was morally complex and raw, while the Magnificent Seven adapted a Japanese samurai story into cowboy lore. And at the center of both sat one very famous saddle.
Number 6.
When you have 7 stars sharing one movie, ego clashes are almost guaranteed. And on the set of The Magnificent Seven, it turned into a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, war for attention. Steve McQueen, in particular, was notorious for stealing scenes. If he wasn't speaking in a shot, he'd fidget with his hat, reload his gun, or pour a handful of bullets into his palm. Anything to pull the audience's eye away from whoever was talking. Yul Brynner, the official leading man, noticed immediately. He was furious that McQueen's little tricks kept drawing attention away from him. At one point, Brynner even planted mounds of dirt under his horse's saddle so that he appeared taller on screen, making sure he literally looked down on McQueen in their shared scenes. The feud simmered for the entire production. And years later, McQueen admitted, "We were like 2 roosters in a henhouse." Yet, ironically, that tension gave the film its spark. The rivalry you see between Brynner's steady leadership and McQueen's rebellious energy wasn't just acting, it was real.
Number 7.
Charles Bronson wasn't just tough on screen. In Mexico, he became a legend to the local children. During filming, kids from the nearby villages would gather to watch the American actor's work. Many of them didn't speak English, but they were mesmerized by Bronson's presence. He was rough, scarred, and quiet. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he would share candy, snacks, and little trinkets with the kids. The filmmakers noticed this, and they actually wove it into the movie itself. Bronson's character, Bernardo O'Reilly, has several touching scenes with the village children, including one where they idolize him as a father figure. Those moments weren't just acting, they were drawn directly from real life. Bronson's natural bond with the kids became one of the most human, heartfelt touches in the entire film, softening a character who might otherwise have been just another gunfighter.
Number 8.
Shooting a Western in the Mexican countryside brought its own challenges, and not all of them were scripted. While the actors were playing cowboys and outlaws, real-life bandits were targeting the production. Locals quickly realized that the film crew was hauling in expensive cameras, lights, costumes, and weapons, not to mention American money. It got so dangerous that the Mexican government had to assign armed guards to protect the set. Think about that. While the cast was pretending to fight off Eli Wallach's gang of 40 bandits, just off camera, actual guards were patrolling to make sure no real bandits attacked. The line between fiction and reality blurred. The dusty villages, the looming threat of raids, the uneasy tension. The actors weren't just pretending, they were living it.
Number 9.
James Coburn, who played the deadly knife thrower Britt, almost didn't make it into the movie. At the time, Coburn was struggling to find work, mostly known as a lanky character actor. One night, he was at a bar with a group of friends, watching another Western on TV. Coburn boasted that he could play a better cowboy than the actor on screen. Someone laughed and said, "Prove it." Fueled by pride, and maybe a little tequila, Coburn left the bar, tracked down the casting office, and auditioned. His confidence, along with his striking, angular look, won him the role. And here's the kicker. His character has very few lines. But that didn't matter. With his towering frame and piercing stare, Coburn turned silence into power. Critics later said his performance proved you didn't need dialogue to dominate the screen. So in a way, a casual bar and helped launch Coburn's career, and gave the Magnificent Seven one of its most unforgettable characters.
Number 10.
While Hollywood could have hired extras from Los Angeles, director John Sturges wanted authenticity. So when it came time to cast the poor Mexican villagers who hire the seven gunfighters, he turned to real people. Many of the actors you see in the film were actual farmers and locals from the surrounding villages in Morelos, Mexico. These weren't trained performers. They were men, women, and children who lived in real adobe homes, tilled real soil, and understood what it meant to fight for survival. Their presence gave the movie a striking realism. The fear in their faces when Calvara's gang rides in, genuine. The gratitude when the gunfighters defend them, it wasn't just a performance. It was pride at seeing their community represented on screen. This decision also gave the film a raw, almost documentary-like edge. In a way, The Magnificent Seven wasn't just telling a story about oppressed villagers, it was using their real voices and faces to tell it.
Number 11.
When people think of The Magnificent Seven, the first thing that comes to mind isn't always the gunfights or the actors. It's the music. The iconic score was composed by Elmer Bernstein. And from the very first trumpet notes, it became an anthem of the American West. Bold, sweeping, and instantly recognizable, the theme carried such power that it practically became a character in the film itself. But here's the twist. When the movie was released in 1960, it only had modest box office success in the United States. It wasn't until later, when Marlboro Cigarettes licensed Bernstein's theme for their commercials, that the music became legendary. For decades, millions heard it blaring on TV, associating it with rugged cowboys and the open range. By then, the Magnificent Seven's theme had outgrown the film. It became one of the most famous pieces of music in cinema history, even played at Bernstein's funeral. In many ways, the score was more magnificent than the movie itself.
Number 12.
Filming in Mexico wasn't glamorous. The cast endured blistering heat, dust storms, and long days with little comfort. But what pushed them over the edge was food. The local catering often served traditional Mexican meals that the Hollywood actors weren't used to: beans, tortillas, and spicy stews. Some cast members loved it, but others demanded real American food. When their complaints went ignored, tension bubbled. At one point, Charles Bronson and James Coburn threatened to walk off set unless better meals were provided. It wasn't just diva behavior. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and losing weight under the grueling conditions. Finally, the studio slowed down and began flying in supplies from the US. But the story spread, and the actors earned a reputation as the Seven Hungry Men before they became the Magnificent Seven.
Number 13.
Remaking a masterpiece is always dangerous, and in 1960, The Magnificent Seven was walking into dangerous territory. The film was directly inspired by Akira Kurosawa's 1954 classic, Seven Samurai, a movie already considered one of the greatest films ever made. Kurosawa's tale of samurai defending a poor village was deeply tied to Japanese culture, history, and philosophy. How could a Hollywood Western possibly capture that same spirit? When word reached Japan that an American studio was adapting his work, critics worried Kurosawa would see it as an insult. After all, many Western remakes of foreign films were dismissed as shallow copies. But when Kurosawa finally watched The Magnificent Seven, he was delighted. He praised the film for keeping the heart of his story intact, the theme of sacrifice, honor, and the struggle between the powerless and the powerful, while transforming it into something uniquely American. He recognized the dusty Mexican villages, the rugged cowboys, and the outlaw bandits as spiritual brothers of his samurai. And then came the gesture that stunned Hollywood. Kurosawa sent John Sturges, the director, a ceremonial katana sword as a personal gift. This wasn't just a polite thank you. In Japanese culture, gifting a sword is a profound symbol of respect, trust, and honor. It meant Kurosawa saw The Magnificent Seven not as a ripoff, but as a worthy companion to his own masterpiece. In that moment, the film became more than just a Western. It became a bridge, connecting East and West, samurai and cowboy, two traditions bound by courage and sacrifice.
Number 14.
When The Magnificent Seven premiered, not all of its actors were household names. In fact, several of them were struggling for recognition, but this single movie turned them into global icons. Take Steve McQueen. Before this, he was mostly a TV actor. After The Magnificent Seven, his star exploded. His restless energy, his cocky charm, and his daring scene-stealing tricks turned him into Hollywood's new golden boy. Within just a few years, he headlined The Great Escape, The Cincinnati Kid, and eventually Bullet, cementing himself as the king of cool. Charles Bronson had also been stuck in small roles before this film, but his rugged face, scarred by childhood hardships, and his quiet intensity made him unforgettable as Bernardo O'Reilly. European audiences in particular loved him. In countries like France and Italy, Bronson became more famous than McQueen, eventually becoming one of the most bankable action stars of the 1970s with films like Death Wish. James Coburn, the lanky, sharp-faced actor who barely had any lines in the film, was transformed into a Hollywood tough guy. His character, Britt, barely speaks. But Coburn proved that silence could be powerful. That role led him to a career in both action and comedy, even earning him an Academy Award years later. And let's not forget Horst Buchholz, the German actor who played Chico. For European audiences, Chico was their entry point into the story, the young, brash, slightly foolish kid who wanted to be a hero. His performance gave the movie an international flavor, and it earned him stardom across Europe. Here's the irony. In the United States, The Magnificent Seven was only a moderate success at first. But in Europe, it was a phenomenon. In France alone, it became one of the most watched films of the decade. The combination of American Western mythology and Kurasawa's storytelling structure resonated across borders. So while the seven gunfighters were defending a tiny Mexican village on screen, in real life, they were launching themselves into global superstardom.
Number 15.
When people think of The Magnificent Seven today, they imagine a timeless Western classic, one of the greats, endlessly quoted, endlessly referenced, and endlessly imitated. But here's the shocking truth. When the film first hit American theaters in October 1960, it was seen as a failure. Yes, that's right. The movie that launched Steve McQueen into superstardom, that gave the world one of the most iconic musical themes in cinema history, and that redefined the Western genre, was barely a blip at the US box office. It opened in roughly 1,000 theaters across the South and Southwest, prime cowboy country. On paper, it should have been an easy win. Westerns were still popular. The cast was stacked with rising stars, and the story had already proven itself in Japan through Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. But American audiences weren't buying it. Part of the problem was timing. By 1960, audiences were starting to drift away from traditional westerns. They wanted something different, something edgier, something that reflected the turbulent world outside the movie screen. The Magnificent Seven, while stylish, was still rooted in classic cowboy tropes. To some critics, it felt like yesterday's story repackaged in a shiny new way. The reviews didn't help. Many US critics dismissed it as a watered-down copy of Kurosawa's masterpiece. Why watch this? They asked, when the Japanese original is deeper, longer, and more profound. Harsh words, especially considering Seven Samurai wasn't widely available to mainstream American audiences at the time. Financially, the numbers told the story. The film cost about $2 million to make, and in its domestic run, it only brought in around $2.25 million. That's barely breaking even. A razor-thin margin once marketing and distribution costs were factored in. For Hollywood accounting, that meant one thing: disappointment. The producers were frustrated. Director John Sturgis, who had poured his heart into the project, worried it might tarnish his career. And the young actors, McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, feared they might lose the momentum they had fought so hard to build. But then, something unexpected happened. The film went overseas. In Europe, audiences didn't just like The Magnificent Seven, they loved it. Where Americans saw a slow, dusty Western, Europeans saw myth, adventure, and spectacle. In France, in Italy, in Germany, crowds packed theaters, drawn by the music, the action, and the charisma of its stars. Suddenly, the very same movie that struggled at home was becoming an international sensation. And then came the biggest surprise of all: the Soviet Union. At the height of the Cold War, when American films were rarely shown behind the Iron Curtain, the Magnificent Seven somehow made it through. The result? More than 67 million tickets sold. To put that in perspective, that's more tickets than most Hollywood blockbusters sell worldwide today. In Russia, the Seven weren't just movie heroes. They became cultural icons. By the time the dust settled, the movie had grossed nearly $10 million worldwide, quadrupling its budget. What had begun as a near failure had transformed into a global phenomenon. And here's the irony: if the Magnificent Seven had only been judged by its American release, it might have been forgotten. Just another almost in Hollywood history. But thanks to its international triumph, it didn't just survive, it thrived. It gained sequels, reboots, countless homages, and a place in cinematic legend. Today, no one remembers the numbers. They remember the theme music, the characters, the gunfights, and the myth. It's a reminder that sometimes greatness isn't recognized right away. Sometimes it takes the world a little longer to catch up.
Bonus.
The story of the Magnificent Seven didn't end with the final reel. In some ways, its most powerful chapter came years later, when its stars rode off into the sunset of their own lives. Steve McQueen, the rebel who outsmarted his studio and risked everything to be in the film, lived fast and burned bright. By the late 1970s, he was one of the most bankable actors in the world. But behind the cool exterior, McQueen's health was slipping. In 1980, at only 50 years old, he lost his battle with cancer. For fans who had grown up idolizing him, it felt as though Hollywood had lost its eternal outlaw. Yul Brynner, the larger-than-life leader of the Seven, lived longer, but his passing in 1985 carried just as much weight. Known for his thunderous presence and unmistakable bald head, Brynner was more than an actor. He was a symbol of authority and charisma. In the years before his death, he had even recorded anti-smoking messages, warning fans not to follow in his footsteps. When he finally succumbed to lung cancer, it wasn't just the death of a movie star, it was the silencing of a cinematic giant. At Brynner's funeral, friends, family, and fans gathered to honor him. There were tears, there was silence, and then something extraordinary happened. As the final tribute, the orchestra began to play Elmer Bernstein's unforgettable theme from The Magnificent Seven. The music rose like a ghost from the past. The same triumphant notes that had once introduced Brynner and his 6 companions riding into a dusty Mexican village now echoed through a quiet chapel. It was as if the Seven had saddled up one last time, not on screen, but in spirit. The mourners sat in awe. Some wept, others smiled through their tears, because at that moment, everyone realized the truth. The Magnificent Seven was never just a movie. It was a myth, a legend, a story of sacrifice and brotherhood that had become larger than the men who acted in it. And so, even in death, the legacy of the Seven endured. McQueen, Brynner, Bronson, Coburn, they became more than actors. They became immortal cowboys, riding forever in the imaginations of audiences around the world. The film began as a remake of a samurai story, but by the time that final note played at Brynner's funeral, it had transformed into something else entirely. A eulogy, not just for its stars, but for an entire era of cinema when heroes were carved out of dust, sweat, and sacrifice. To this day, every time Bernstein's theme blares from a speaker, you're not just hearing music, you're hearing a farewell, a salute to legends who never truly died, because their story will keep riding on. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, do us a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next dive into TV's untold stories.